All right. Well, good morning, everyone. If you're joining us, I want to remind you that this meeting is going to be recorded so that it can be sent out to other registrants and it might be shared with the plan membership. So please keep your cameras off. And if you have any questions, please put them into the chat. Jeffrey Freeman with Plan and myself, Gretchen Pruitt, will be monitoring the chat. And we will ask the questions throughout the presentation as it's relevant and as it works into the flow. So please don't hesitate to put them in as they come up. And then Jeffrey and I will be feeding the questions to Eddy as we go along. And we are about to start. We've got one more minute until 10. So everybody get their coffee. Hopefully everybody's had a chance to do everything they need to do so that they can focus completely on the next 2 hours. I feel like we need some fancy music of some kind. I'm gonna have to work on that. Do you have a walkout song, Eddy, that you use?
No, but now that you've planted that idea, I'm going to have to think of one.
Mhm. It's a good thing to have in your toolkit, right? That walkout song. So I see people continue to join. So, but it,
Yvonne just joined.
yes. Okay. I am going to go ahead and kick this off. A little bit of housekeeping. And want to remind everybody again, go ahead and keep your cameras off. If you have questions as we go through the presentation, please put them in the chat. And we will, Jeffrey Freeman of Plan and myself, we will be asking those for you. Eddy, at any point, if you decide you need the person who asked to unmute and have a dialogue, great. But we'll be trying to handle things through the chat when at all possible. So this session is going to run roughly 2 hours or however long it needs to go. And part of that, I'm sure, will be your participation. So we're glad you're here. And I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So my name is Gretchen Pruitt. I am the Interim Executive Director of Plan, Partners Library Action Network. For those of you who are Texas librarians, you may remember that once upon a time, there were library systems throughout the state, 10 systems that served libraries throughout Texas in a more personal and local way. Those were unfunded about 13, 14 years ago now. And so CTLS was the only system that was a nonprofit. They have survived and they've become planned. So we are a support organization for public libraries in Texas, but we're really pleased to be offering a series of library leadership essentials, 5 sessions over the month of June, the next 2 weeks. These sessions are brought to you by the Institute of Museum and Library Services, yay, and the Texas State Library and Archives Commission. So they've provided the funding for allowing us to do this training, so we will make it as available as we possibly can. And with that, I want to remind you that you will need to register for each of the sessions individually. So registering for one does not automatically register you for all. If you cannot attend, please register and we will make sure that we get you the recording. So we're starting out today with one of my favorite library presenters of all time, Mr. Edward Smith. But many of you, if you know him, you'll know him as Eddy Smith. Eddy is a passionate library advocate, and his strong and eloquent voice has served Texas libraries for many years. He is, in his day job, he is the executive director of the Abilene Library Consortium, and he's also the founder of Tharseo Group, LLC. For over 25 years, Eddy has served as a change agent for companies, higher education, and nonprofits. He is a strategic guide, helping organizations plan with courage and move forward with clarity and joy. And I say that last word with with pride and conviction, knowing that Eddy brings joy to his work. He loves libraries and reading and literacy, and he knows how those change lives. And so, our goal in these sessions of 5 classes are going to be to help you all bring the same sense of passion, joy, and facilitate your leadership capabilities with these sessions. So, with that, Eddy, if I'm not missing anything, take it away.
Well, thank you. Am I coming through? Can you hear me?
You're great.
Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thanks for that amazing introduction. Full disclosure, Gretchen and I have been friends for years and years ago. We served on the TLA board together. And now we serve on the Talker Foundation board together. So we've been friends a long time, and one of my favorite librarians ever. So I'm super excited to get to be with you all today and to get to talk to you about this topic, which I absolutely love. A colleague of mine told me yesterday, they asked if I was nervous about giving this talk, and I said no, and they said, that's because you're a strategic planning ninja, which I will gladly claim. So I wore my black shirt today just so that I can, channel my inner, I don't know, ninja-ness. Anyway, we are going to talk about strategic planning, which if you have had the experiences I have had, those very words kind of already have started to suck your soul away. And so we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about why it has become that drudgery in our own minds, and we're going to find ways to fix that. So just to kind of cover, Gretchen already sort of mentioned how this block of time will go, but we're going to cover the basics in the next hour and a half or so, and then we'll have at least 30 minutes at the end for discussion, for questions, and I absolutely at that time we can turn on our cameras and actually have a dialogue if you want to. But if you have a question as we go, throw it in the chat, and I give Gretchen and Jeffrey freedom to interrupt me if they feel it's appropriate, when necessary, to chime in if it's relevant to the moment or really timely kind of question. Otherwise, we'll capture all those questions and we'll talk about them all at the end. Okay, so, and we will land this plane at noon at the latest. That's a promise. Not like American Airlines, which never can get you anywhere on time, but we will land for sure before noon. So that's our goal today. I'm so glad you all are with us, and I can't wait to have this discussion with you. So let's jump right in. It's probably best to start off with a basic definition. What is strategy? A little hint from my slide here. If you think chess is strategic, yes, you are absolutely right. And chess is an excellent metaphor for what strategy actually is. But in terms of library life and organizational life, strategy is really a set of integrated choices that then position our organizations to achieve something unique or something sustainable, some kind of advantage. If you're a for-profit company, for example, you're looking for some kind of sustainable competitive advantage, and by, in essence, doing different things from your competitors. That's the basic definition of strategy. It really comes down to what will we focus on, and just as importantly as what we will focus on, what will we not focus on? I think one of the huge misunderstood aspects of strategy and strategic planning is that it actually is more about what you choose not to do than it is actually about what you're choosing to do. So from a library perspective, how do our programs, how do our operations, how do our community partnerships, how do those things align and reinforce the mission? And what makes them distinctive? We're going to ask a lot of questions today because questions are the the language of strategy. So I'm going to leave a lot of rhetorical questions hanging in the air, but those are the kinds of ways of thinking that strategy helps with. So, okay, there's a famous Harvard business professor. His name is Michael Porter. He he wrote the seminal article on strategy in 1996. It is ironically called "What is Strategy?" And it appeared in the Harvard Business Review, and it has trickled down now through many, many manifestations of leadership and many manifestations of strategic planning and operations. But he, in essence, says strategy is choosing what not to do. Strategy is about making deliberate choices. Doing different things or doing things differently than your competitive rivals to create unique value. And if you think that definition doesn't really have meaning in library land, I beg to differ. I think we have profound competitive rivals to our libraries culturally. I think we have challenges to our utilization, and we have challenges to our value in culture, and so strategy is about making deliberate choices to create unique value. Strategy is all about trade-offs. You can't be everything to everybody. I know that may burst some bubbles because as librarians, we love to be everything to everybody, but you just can't. You must choose what not to do, and that's the way that's got to be. And so when making those choices, fit really matters. The advantage that strategy brings to you and to the organization really comes from how activities fit together and sort of reinforce one another. That creates a sustainable advantage, which is really about creating a position that's difficult for someone else to imitate. And I'll give you some examples here of strategies that you may or may not really have thought of as strategies, but things that you're probably familiar with, because strategies really enter our world all the time. We intersect with them all the time. You just may not actually identify them as strategies. So here's some examples. The first is Toyota. I'm proud to talk about Toyota because I drive one and I have driven them for years. But Toyota's operational strategy was to make manufacturing very lean. In fact, they've created an entire industry called lean manufacturing around their concept, which was really about how can we eliminate waste, how can we reduce inventory, and basically build into their process an attitude and sort of value of continual improvements. And they have all kinds of mechanisms inside the organization and inside the manufacturing plants that make that possible. One you may have heard of, and it's the 7 whys. And so when they have a problem and they're doing root cause analysis on that problem, they're asking why down through 7 layers. And when they get down to layer 7, they are, statistically anyway, really close to understanding what really went wrong in the situation, that they can address the actual problem and not some misunderstood or misperceived idea of the problem, and therefore implement a wrong solution. So that sort of philosophy, if you want to call it that, of lean manufacturing is their strategy. Another one you might be really familiar with because you just lived with it or experienced it, and that is from Apple. Apple has a strategy of integrated design, and that is their strategy is to align the design of everything, the hardware, the software, and then tightly couple those things while maintaining control of their supply chain. And if you are an Apple user, you know exactly what I mean. They've integrated design. If you have a MacBook and an iPhone, you can get your messages in both places, that sort of thing. But most of us are, even if you're not an Apple user currently, most of us are familiar with Apple's integrated design because we may have used or have seen iTunes, and we had an iPod at some point. That was an integrated design. The hardware for the iPod was designed to fluidly interconnect and connect with the software for iTunes and make it seamless to purchase music, push the music to your player, etc. And all of that was tightly controlled. In fact, if you were around in the 90s and the explosion of the first iMac, the whole sale of iMac was driven off of iTunes and the iPod. If you had an iPod and you wanted to get music on it, you really needed to have an iMac in order to do that really flawlessly. And so that sense of that value of integrated design, it became their operational strategy. Same thing, similarly with Southwest Airlines. I'm sure you all are familiar with Southwest Airlines. Really had a kind of low-cost, high-efficiency model. Really, that drove a number of operational choices for Southwest. But the strategy for Southwest was not to be the lowest cost airline among all the airlines. The strategy from Southwest originally was other airlines were not their competition. They really looked at how can we compete, not with what other airlines are charging to fly from Dallas to Las Vegas, but what does it cost to rent a car to drive from Dallas to Las Vegas? And that became their competitive decision-making point. And so they needed a high efficiency model to sort of meet that low cost. And you may be familiar with things like that Southwest decided to do, like they only used one style of aircraft, which made it easy for training pilots and maintenance and parts and all those kinds of things. They have no hubs. And so it was all about single legs from one place to another, open seating, fast loading at the gate, those kinds of things that really drove them to make operational efficiency decisions based on a strategy, which was how do we get the people who are renting cars and driving? And so Southwest was less concerned about what American Airlines was charging to fly from Dallas to Las Vegas. They were looking at what does it cost to rent a car to do that. Another one you're probably really familiar with, you may not even think of it as a strategy, but Baskin-Robbins was all about creating customer experience consistency. And they did that in a very specific way. And that was to have a flavor for every day of the month. In fact, if you look at their logo, 31 is built into the Baskin-Robbins logo. And that became their operational strategy. To create a consistent customer experience from store to store. And who doesn't love ice cream? A couple of nonprofit examples, Feeding America is a great example of their strategy is all about data-driven food distribution. So they use technology to allocate food equitably across a national network of local food banks. Habitat for Humanity, another one you may be familiar with. You're probably really familiar with their strategy, which was to sort of have volunteer-driven construction. Habitat builds homes for low-income neighbors, and they do that with volunteer assistance in the construction process. And then another one that everyone is familiar with, the Red Cross, which really is their strategy is about disaster response readiness. And they do that through regional warehouses where supplies are ready, a little more local to an event when an event happens, so that they can respond more quickly. All of those sort of operational things are driven from a strategy of, hey, we want to be ready for disaster response. Okay, probably about all those too long, but just examples of things. We encounter them all the time, but we don't think of them as strategies. And so a few years ago, I encountered these statistics. And so here they are. 10,000 senior leaders of a management research group study found that 97% of them said the key to organizational success was long-term strategic thinking. Okay, well, that as a strategic planner, that made me happy. And then a separate study found that out of 500 managers across 25 major organizations, 96% of those said they don't have time for strategic thinking. Okay, well, if 97% of them said this is the key to organizational success, and 96 of them said they don't have time for this, as Columbo would say, something doesn't add up. I'm probably aging myself with Columbo there. So, you know, if you know Columbo, you can throw a thumbs up in the chat or whatever. If you're old enough to remember Columbo, Gretchen, I hear you laughing. So, so that doesn't add up. If people are hugely saying that this is the key to organizational success, and most of those people say they don't have time for it, that just doesn't make sense. So this begs the question, what is strategic thinking? What does it actually mean? Are you one? That's a good question. Are you a strategic thinker? And if you asked me that question, I would absolutely say, of course, as an organizational leader, of course I'm a strategic thinker. Do I know what that really means? I don't know, but there's no set definition, but here's what I think it actually means. What is it really to be a strategic thinker? The first piece of it, I believe, has to do with reflection. Strategic thinking involves making time to reflect and asking really sometimes tough questions. What is involved for us to succeed? What's at stake if we don't? What are the opportunities for us to succeed? What are the risks? Those are hard questions, and they can't be dealt with lightly. They have to be. You have to really sort of introspectively think about the organization and think about where it's headed, and think about and even just in your own life, how do you become strategic in your own life? You have to really reflect on, where am I right now? How did I get here? What's at stake if I don't make changes? What are the opportunities? What are the risks? Reflection, first piece of, I think, of becoming a strategic thinker. The second piece of strategic thinking involves creating connections between ideas and plans and people, etc., resources that others may not see or fail to make. And so that ability to create connections is very powerful and a huge chunk of what really strategic thinking is all about. As I already mentioned, the next piece of strategic thinking really involves choices. Once you reflect on the situation, once you connect the ideas, you still have one problem. You can't do everything. And I know, again, that busts our bubble in library land because we want to be all things to all people, but you can't do everything. And so how do we make choices that align? And so this is the last and I think most crucial piece of strategic thinking. It necessitates the ability and willingness to make choices. What will we do? What won't we do? And it takes a lot of courage to ask those questions and answer them honestly. It takes a lot of courage to sort of close the door on one opportunity or potential opportunity in order to make a path to open a different door. But good strategy is narrowing. Good strategy is about making decisions about what you won't do and what you will do. So what is strategic thinking? Well, reflection, connection, and making choices that lead to action, which is really the courage to choose. That's what I think strategic thinking is. There's probably different definitions. I would hope that if we had Michael Porter on this call from the Harvard Business School, he would say that I was pretty spot on. Otherwise, we'd drop him from the call. Okay, so how do we foster that? How do we foster strategic thinking in ourselves? How do we foster it in others? Let me give you just some quick tips. This is all sort of introductory to us to actually talking about planning, but there's no point in talking about strategic planning if you're not really a strategic thinker or you don't know how to think strategically. So I thought this might be a really good basic beginning. So how do we foster strategic thinking in ourselves? Well, the first thing we need to do is observe what's happening around us. What are the trends? Make a routine in your life and in your work of seeing what's in motion around us. do we understand what's moving and what impacts the organization? Do we know what's happening in the greater profession? Are we watching what's happening in our funding or in our community? Whether that's, at a community service level or at a political level, whatever. And then proactively, I think, connecting those dots and observing that trend. Another piece of proactivity here of observing trends is just staying connected with peers about our industry and our marketplace. And this is one of the things that I think real value that plan brings to members is that we especially, I'm from Abilene, so out here in the western side of the state, it's very easy to feel very isolated and disconnected from the profession. And so opportunities and organizations like Plan, TLA, and other things like that help us stay connected with one another and the profession at large is really helpful to understanding what are the trends, what's in motion around us, what's moving. So observing those trends, a big chunk of really encouraging our brains to sort of think strategically, then ask questions. As I already mentioned, questions are the language of strategy. What impact will this decision have on our work or on our organization or on our funding? What will this change bring success? These are the kinds of tough questions that are hard to answer. How do we best accomplish our mission with the limited resources we have? Those kinds of things. And then the third one, you got to speak the language. I'm convinced that you have to sort of sound strategic when you're writing things and when you're talking about your organization with people in the community, or you're talking about it with city or county administration. Focus the message and structure your communications logically. Main point first, etc. Be succinct, but really give context to whatever decision you're facing and how that fits into the mission and the greater context of the organization. I think there is huge human value in us understanding how our work fits into a whole. I think we have a deep need for that as human beings, to understand and want to be a part of work that matters. And so giving that context is incredibly strategic. And sometimes if you have struggled with figuring out that context, you're basically flexing the strategic muscles to get those answers. And so speak the language. And then number 4, make time for thinking. This is all about avoiding the tyranny of the urgent, which I'll talk more about in a second. But the way I do this, I block time on my calendar. I just allocate time, once or twice a month, an hour or two. Sometimes it's a Friday afternoon, to just think about, what is our organization doing? Where do we want to go next? What needs are we not meeting? How can we fill those needs? I do this very intentionally because if you're not intentional about it, the time will get crowded out. The other thing that I don't know, some of you may be like me, I had to just over the years really deal with the fact that I don't know, I would almost call it a kind of guilt of, in those times when I'm thinking about those questions, there's a kind of guilt that arises, like I'm not accomplishing anything, or I've got this stack of stuff on my desk that I need to process and I'm not getting that stuff done. How do I make time when I've got this work to do? So you got to sort of wrestle with of avoiding that guilt of I'm not accomplishing anything, in order to actually strategically position the organization and flex the mental muscle so that when you need to have a strategy, you can come up with one. And for that, just kind of as a little more in-depth discussion of that, I'll give you, some of you may be very familiar with this. If you've ever read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, this is the time management matrix. This is how to avoid the tyranny of the urgent. But if you've never seen this sort of matrix before, let me just kind of give you a little brief overview. So across the columns is urgent and not urgent. So it's a very binary chart. And across the row, down the rows is important and not important. And so the first quadrant, urgent and important, quadrant number 1, that's the stuff you really can't control, right? The building is on fire. We have a crisis. The water pipe is broken. It's flooding, the library. Okay, well, those things are urgent and they are important. They must be dealt with. They tend to intrude and override everything when they happen, but they don't always happen. Then, not urgent, but important, quadrant number 2, this is where strategic planning falls in. Right? It's not particularly driving with an urgency, but it is hugely important. And if we don't make space for quadrant 2, we will never get the important, unurgent things dealt with. But they are hugely important and they must be dealt with. Quadrant number 3, urgent and not important. This is where most of us live our lives. This is where, I get a text message from a friend. It's probably not important, and it may not even be urgent, but the technology drives the urgency, right? When the phone rings, you answer it. Those are the urgency is not necessarily in the content of what's happening, but just in the circumstance of what is happening. And so that's where we get a lot of interruptions, and those things derail us. They will, in fact, fill our day. Those quadrants 3 and 4 will absolutely consume every minute of every day if you let them, and you will never get to the things that you need to be thinking about in quadrant 2. And then, of course, quadrant 4 is the not urgent and not important, and these are just absolute time wasters, and whenever possible, you want to stay out of that quadrant, unless you just, really want to waste time. This is trivial stuff. I was in a library recently, and the tech services staff, highly qualified, certified librarians, who had, cataloging, experienced, etc. They were counting pieces of the puzzles. They were counting puzzle pieces, which might be an important thing to do, but does that need to be done by the librarians? Couldn't we get a volunteer to count the puzzle pieces? Or, couldn't we just put a label on the box that says, this puzzle may not have all of its pieces, and go with that, or just buy some new puzzles? Yeah, there were, what are we filling our time with that isn't actually strategic? So if you're counting puzzle pieces, you might rethink that.
Hey, Eddie,
Yeah.
really quickly, are we able to share your slides after the presentation? I know was sitting here trying to frantically write down the matrix, and then I thought, let me ask and see if you're willing to let us send these out.
Absolutely. I mean, this particular slide is, this is not my content. This is, you can Google time matrix or Stephen Covey, Tyranny of the Urgent, and find 10,000 versions of this. I just grabbed one. But yes, absolutely. I'm happy to give you my slides as a PDF, and you can share it as need be.
Great. Thank you. Rest assured, everyone, you will get those.
Yeah. Okay. Where were we? Strategy is hard. Let's be honest about that. Developing strategic approaches stuff is not easy, right? Wouldn't you rather play checkers than chess? Sure. But it makes the difference, I think, between being an average leader and an exceptional leader. Being able to really, and the reason why chess is a great metaphor for strategy is because chess is a complex set of choices, and you must make choices. And sometimes you have to make sacrificial choices. And it requires you to see the whole environment. If you've ever played chess, you're familiar with the phrase "see the whole board," because you can get sort of tunnel vision when you're playing chess and only think about the piece that you're about to move and not see the ramifications or the impact of that or the implications of your move across the whole board. And so strategy is hard. We can be honest about that, but you don't need big budgets or a new title to be more strategic. You just really need to be deliberate in your thinking, and deliberate in your choices, and deliberate in your actions. And so I would say, just in terms of strategic thinking overall, investing some time and energy to reflect on situations, finding ways to connect ideas and people that you never linked together before, and then just having the courage to make those choices about what you will and won't do. I think everybody can increase their strategic contributions and their strategic thinking just internally. And you can apply that to work. You can apply that to organizations you volunteer in, churches, whatever, Meals on Wheels. You can apply that just in your own personal life. How do I be more strategic in my choices, in how I spend my time, and how I move forward, or what's my next move? Where do I want to go? Those are all very strategic questions. And so remember, whoops, one too many slides. Remember, strategy is about knowing where you're going. And if you don't know where you're going, you'll end up somewhere else. So never a bad time for a Yogi Berra quote. Okay, let's talk now. All that was introduction. Let's talk now about what is strategic planning. If that was strategic thinking, what is strategic planning? Well, if you're like me, you have worked in a number of organizations and have done numerous strategic planning efforts over the course of my career. Most of them painful, many of them unfruitful. And as I made up this quote, strategy meetings are where people talk about doing stuff they'll never actually do. So it's been sort of a lived experience, which was what drove me professionally to find a better way to do it. Because I didn't like the fact that this thing that really seemed important was kind of soul sucking. And so I wanted to find a way to do it that would invoke joy and be actually an experience that's worth having. And so strategic planning is really the process of sorting and sifting priorities to determine strategies to move forward with. That's really all that it is. It's a sorting and a sifting. But if you've had the experiences I've had, it's usually a boring process. But it takes courage to plan well, and it can be a very joyful process for you and for the organization if you're doing it well. So I want to introduce you to a process that you can follow. This is a very simple 5-part process for planning that will help you engage in it with courage and hope and sort of drive some outcomes out of it. And that is using the acronym BRAVE. And so we'll break down each of these pieces, but we're going to begin with reality. We're going to reclaim purpose for ourselves or for the organization. We're going to align priorities. We're going to validate the plan, and then we're going to engage the culture. It's a 5-part plan to help you plan with courage. Okay, let's start with beginning with reality. Courage starts with truth. Truthfully, this is about getting perspective. It's about getting clarity. It's about understanding what's our current reality and doing that with honesty and, insofar as possible, precision. Right? What is right? What is wrong? What's in motion around us? What are the patterns in the organization? What are the trends that we're seeing in the culture and in our communities and in our environment? The outcome of that is a sort of, not just for you individually, some of you, your organization, you may be the only one in your organization, but if you have a larger organization, you have several people working together, or you have, community, maybe community volunteers or board members or friends who are taking part in this process, the outcome of all that reality excavating, all that truth excavating, is really a shared understanding of what is really true today for the organization. None of that has any impact yet on what we decide next, but it does inform what comes next. And so it's a really important piece. So how do we begin with reality? Well, we got to start with asking really hard questions. And a great place to begin with really hard questions is, where are our pain points? Where are we struggling? Where are we having to work harder than it feels like we should? What's working? What isn't working? What's confused? Is there anything missing in our work that we absolutely could use or need? What are the patterns and trends? We talked about that. What are things that are happening internally? Circs are down. Patron, feet through the door are up. What's happening externally? What's happening in the Texas legislature? What's happening in the culture at large with libraries, etc.? Can we define and narrow down to three? What are the three most important things that we do as an operation, as a library? And can we just keep it to three? We might have 20 things that hit that list, but can we narrow down to what are the three most important? What is helping us? What is hindering us? Where do we need to bring things to a necessary end? If you're not familiar with Necessary Endings, it's a fantastic book by Dr. Henry Cloud, written some years ago. And it really talks about how to determine, it's actually, decision-making, helpful decision-making questions to determine whether something needs to be brought to an end. We can't do everything forever. All services have a life cycle. All things we do have a point at which they're no longer effective to keep going. Can we understand how to make those decisions and if necessary, bring things to a necessary end? That's hugely important later because it informs how to make decisions to take on something new. We can't just keep adding more weight to the cart we're pulling. We got to take some things off the cart. Or maybe I should use the analogy of book truck. We can't just keep adding things to the book truck. We got to take some books off. Okay. So good plug for weeding right there. Okay. Second piece of my 5-step plan is to reclaim your purpose. Now, whether this is your personal purpose or your organizational purpose, the truth is if we lose our why, we'll lose our way. If you lose your why, you'll lose your way. So reclaiming your purpose is really about reconnecting with our core mission, right? Why do we exist as a library? That's my definition of mission. But if you get confused about what is mission and what is vision, etc., don't worry about those words. Just what's our why? Why do we exist? Why is this organization here? Where do we want to go? That's about destination. That's what I would call vision. Do we have a destination in mind? If we have our why, we have a reason for existing, and we have a destination defined where we'd like to go, then we can talk about, well, who do we want to be as an organization? That's about values. How do we want to serve? That's all about internal values. How do we want to operate? So if mission is why and vision is where, values is really all about who do we want to be as we go. Values are, like vision, can be aspirational. We may have real values that aren't aspirational. We actually live them out, right? Like customer service is important to us. Okay, well, that's a value. We might have some aspirational values. We want to always be kind. Well, yes, we want that, but we don't always be kind, right? On our best days, we might do that, but some days we're not that. So can we help ourselves and our team align our purpose, the combination of all those things that we just talked about, and the people? How do I fulfill my why? How do I fulfill the organization's why? Where do I fit in that? That alignment really helps people feel like they're doing something meaningful and important. We're not just keeping the lights on and making sure the fax machine doesn't break. We are actually accomplishing something that our community needs or our patrons need. So we did this exercise at TLA at a workshop that TLA a few months ago. And I loved it. It was from the state library. They sort of gave us this model, but I absolutely loved it, and I'm totally stealing it. And that is, can we state it very simply by just sort of filling in the blanks in a single sentence, right? We are, fill in the blank. Who are we? Schleicher County Public Library. I don't know if you're on the call, Schleicher County, but right, that's who we are. And we help fill in the blank, attach it, connect it to people. Who are we helping? And what are we helping them to do? Something, right? We are the Schleicher County Public Library, and we help the residents of Schleicher County travel the world in their mind. Or I just totally made that up, but you get the idea, right? Like that it helps us take our mission and these things that can be very abstract and really put it down into something very practical that communicates very simply, helps you tell the story of the organization, and that becomes very powerful to then, when you go meet with the county commissioners, you can say, "Hi, I'm the director of the library, and we help fill in the blanks." Okay, the outcome of all that is just a refreshed clarity on why your organization exists and who you are becoming and what you're trying to accomplish. And those same questions can apply just to your personal life, right? Why am I here? Where do I want to go? Who do I want to be? How do I want to be in my life? And then connect that with, I am Eddy Smith, and I'm here to help organizations courageously plan and execute with joy. See how simple that is? It doesn't take a huge amount of wordsmithing to really accomplish something very meaningful in that very simple statement. That was a very powerful workshop that we did. Some of you may have been at that workshop that we did at TLA, and I'm totally stealing this this fill in the blank tool from the state library staff. Thank you if any state library staff are on the call. So, okay. Once we have sort of reconnected with our purpose, we then have to align our priorities. And the reason for that is not everything matters equally. I would even argue not everything matters. There's plenty of our work that happens day in and day out that really at the end of the day doesn't matter. Certainly doesn't matter at the end of the week. And it certainly won't matter 5, 10, 15 years from now. But there is work that we do that does matter at the end of the day, at the end of the week, and 5, 10, 15 years from now. When I first started at the Library Consortium, we were starting a huge statewide digitization project with about 16 partners across the state. And I used to tell my staff, most of what we do day in and day out won't matter next year, but the digitization effort will matter 100 years from now. And so there was an opportunity to just sort of place the importance and the priority of the work in a context that made sense and sort of motivated. And so helping your organization sort of and determining what your organization's strategic priorities are is a huge piece of planning. In fact, that's ultimately what planning is. It's all about making choices, right? So you have to identify what the priorities are before you can choose. Okay, so how do we do that? Whoops, one too many slides. Sorry about that. So how do we do that? Well, you start by, let's assess what our current activities are. Where are we the most effective? Where are we having the greatest impact? Those are two slightly different questions, but you might get different answers, right? You might be having a great impact with a program that is hugely ineffective, crazy expensive to operate. It takes a huge lift of staff time and energy and resources, but it has a huge impact, right? But you might also have something that's very, very effective that it's hard to measure the impact of, right? For example, an online catalog, incredibly effective at getting done what it needs to get done. Hard to measure its impact until you can't find something in the collection, right? You might have a program like summer reading that has an enormous impact on the community and on your patrons, but it's an incredibly ineffective to operate. It's a huge lift. There's a reason why we only do it once a year, right? It's a huge lift. It's an enormous amount of staff energy and time and resources. But effectiveness isn't necessarily the key component. Impact is its intended outcome, right? So you got to sort of courageously use those priorities to say no to things. That's where it really comes down to it. And that, what can we stop doing? Are there things we're doing that we can stop doing? And many of you have made these kind of choices. You have services that you might pause while you're doing summer reading because it's such a huge staff input, staff lift. So we do this all the time. We just don't think of it as being strategic in our operations, but they really are. Those are opportunities to really strategically make decisions. Okay. You got to understand who you serve and what they need. This is critically important. Understand who you serve. Well, you might think, well, we're the library, so we serve the community. Okay, but who do you really serve? And what do they need? Not what do you provide, but what do they need? Those may be two different answers. You provide a certain number of things, but that may not be what they need. So understanding what they need is really helpful. Just because you understand what they need doesn't mean you can provide all those needs or that you would even want to. But it is helpful and informs what you do provide, and it's always beneficial when you can be meeting a specific need that they have. When you do that, you actually create kind of raving fans of your services because they feel a need being met internally. So then I think one of the biggest challenges for every organization is identifying their top 3 priorities. And I underlined top 3 because I'm a firm believer in the rule of 3. Something about having 3 things in sequence. It's actually a rhetorical mechanism called the rule of 3. So when we speak, we give 3 examples of things. But when it comes to strategic planning, our human brain is very good at organizing and keeping priority of 3 things. If you add a 4th thing, you might as well have 40 things on the list because our brains get muddled in how we keep up with them. But if you can keep it to 3 or even less, you will have an amazing focus to drive that thing towards its intended outcome. And so identifying the top 3, this is one of the hardest things to do in an organization, is really just narrowing down what are our top 3 priorities. They don't have to be the top 3 priorities forever. They could be the top 3 priorities for the season or for the summer or for the next 5 days, whatever. But being able to shift and identify the top 3 priorities, and I wouldn't bother enumerating any more than 3. Just pick the top 3. You may end up with 20 things on the long list, but don't bother putting them in order, because come back to the list after you accomplish the first 3 and reorder the list. Those priorities always shift. Things are always in motion organizationally. So identifying those top 3 priorities, the best way to fulfill our why and reach our where, get to our destination. So that's all about mission and vision. And then just really being courageous to say no to the things that are not in the top priorities, even though they may be really good things. That helps you stay focused on a plan for what to do right now. That's really what strategic planning is all about. Okay, the next stage is validate the plan, because courageous plans without execution is really just conjecture. If you don't ever test the plan, build some rhythms to execute the plan, you're not, and you don't ever, if you make this great plan to get everybody rowing in the same direction, hence my visual there, but you don't actually get in the boat and row, it's just pie in the sky. You just did some great thinking. And this is where a lot of organizations that I work with kind of fall over. They're great about getting together, thinking through what they might want to accomplish, maybe even creating some action plans to carry those things out, but then they don't actually do it. And so plans without execution are conjecture. So this is about building rhythms and systems that help you stay accountable. Basic accountability. Have a tool that keeps you, helps you stay on track with whatever plan you're executing. Whether that is whether that's a project management tool like an online thing, or a checklist or a spreadsheet, whatever. build something that is reliable that you can use to stay on track. And then establish a rhythm in which you can review and adjust the plan all the time. Whether that's monthly or quarterly or annually, whatever rhythm makes sense in your organization. If you're not ever reviewing the plan and adjusting it, then it goes stale very, very quickly. And all of us probably have had experiences where we made a 5-year plan, and we printed it up for the board and put it into pretty binders and distributed it, and then it sat on a shelf and got dusty until 4.5 years later. You think, oh, we're coming up on 5 years. We should probably figure out if we did any of those things. Right? That's not good strategic planning. It really involves establishing a rhythm to review, and I would say hugely important, adjust the plan. Stuff changes in our reality. Priorities shift, funding shifts, things happen, things go away. Needs change, and so have a rhythm by which you're continually sort of validating the plan and rechecking it and tweaking it and moving it forward, and then measure that progress in meaningful ways, whatever that looks like. I would encourage you not just to have, we set a goal, we had 20 steps in between to get it done, and then we celebrated at the end when we got it done. Might be a long period of time while those 20 steps were being executed. I would find ways to meaningfully measure that. And if a great example, if you've ever done fundraising or seen anybody who's done fundraising and they put the little thermometer up, on a board, and the thermometer gets redder and redder as they raise their money. That is a way of measuring progress that is very visual, communicates, hey, we're working on something, and we've made it mindful to ourselves and to others by this sort of visual means. Your way of measuring progress doesn't necessarily have to be visual, but it needs to be meaningful. And then continually test the alignment between the strategy and what we're doing. Is what we're doing driving our mission forward? Is what we're doing helping us move towards our vision? Is what we're doing aligned with our values? Are we doing anything outside our values? Those kinds of questions are part of validating the plan. Okay, and then the last step, engage the culture. Because strategy might launch the plan, but culture actually carries it forward. That is hugely important. It doesn't matter what you plan. If you don't have an organizational culture that can accomplish that plan, it doesn't matter how good the strategies are. Famous management guru Peter Drucker famously coined the phrase, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so if you have the best strategies on the planet, but you don't have a culture that can adopt those strategies and actually execute them and carry them out, then it doesn't matter how good they were. They're not ever going to happen. And so the way you make sure that you're engaging the culture is make sure that your culture is living out your set of values, whatever those things are. And I encourage you actually translate the abstraction of a value into something actionable. So here's a great example of what I mean by that. I did a value exercise once with a group of accountants, and when I asked them, hey, as a group, what do you value? How do you want to be? How do you want to do your work? Their response was, well, we value accuracy. Okay, great, but that's a bit of an abstraction. What does that mean to you day in and day out? How can you manifest accuracy day in and day out? And they were quick to come up with the idea of, well, we double check our work. Okay, that's a very meaningful thing. And if someone new comes into the organization, they can say, hey, we have this value of accuracy, and we do that by double checking our work. Okay, that's beautiful. Like that's translating the abstraction into action, very meaningful. So I encourage you, think about what your values might be, and then how do you actually do that? How does it impact how you answer the phone, or how you answer a reference question, or how you help a patron cross the desk. What are those actionable things? And then reinforce the rhythm of review, and do that in very systematic ways. And I encourage everyone, if you really want to integrate joy as sort of shaping your culture, you got to celebrate the wins. And for this, there's no better example than looking at sports, particularly football. I'm not a huge football fan, but I do know one thing about football: if you keep moving the ball forward, you win. And so look at how football systematically celebrates motion towards the win, right? You get 4 chances to move the ball 10 yards. And if you move the ball 10 yards, you get 4 more chances. Well, every time you move the ball 10 yards, if you know anything about football, that's a first down. And I don't know about anywhere else, but in West Texas, a first down is a huge celebration. If you've ever been to a high school football game, it's not only a way to celebrate the win, but it's a sponsorship opportunity, because here in Abilene, it's not just a first down; it's a first financial first down anyway. Right? It's a way of integrating joy. And then they call a first down on the loudspeaker, and the crowd goes crazy. Why? Because they are systematically celebrating short movements towards the win. If those weren't there, you only get to celebrate the win when the ball crosses into the end zone, which is not enough to sustain the emotional momentum necessary to continue carrying the ball forward. There's a huge rationale behind why we celebrate first downs. And so take that as a metaphor. What are ways in our execution of our strategic plan that we can celebrate the wins as we go, so that we can systematically, maybe in a small way, just acknowledge, hey, we're making progress towards our goal. And then just recognize there is huge human value for yourself, for your teams, for other people involved in the library, library boards, friends of the library, and just recognizing the joy that comes from working towards and ultimately achieving your goals. So the outcome there is all about creating a healthy, energized environment that sort of carries the weight of your strategy into accomplishment of your mission. That's really what strategic planning is all about. And here's some wisdom from Churchill. It's always, of course, good to test the results. No matter how good the strategy may be, you got to make sure, are we actually accomplishing what we set out to accomplish? So that's the model. It will help you plan with courage, move forward with joy. But it really, I'll just kind of cover it all again, just really quickly, so you kind of have it sort of ingrained in you. The model is really about begin with reality, because planning with courage starts with truth. Reclaiming your purpose, because if you lose your why, you'll lose your way. Aligning your priority, because not everything matters equally. Validating that plan, because courage without execution is really just conjecture. And then engaging the culture, because strategy may launch the plan, but culture is what carries it. That's it. One bit of advice I would give you, don't try to go this alone. If this is a hard thing to do if you are in the organization and you need to be a part of these conversations, I would encourage you, get help from an objective third party. Someone like the plan staff, hire a consultant. You don't necessarily have to hire a consultant. You could recruit someone from your community or someone on the friends board, someone who doesn't have an axe to grind in the organization, but is willing to help objectively ask hard questions and kind of help you sift through and sit in the discomfort of those hard questions to get to answers. And if you're in a library by yourself, you're the only person who works there, are there some colleagues in a nearby community who also have libraries? You could help each other. It is really helpful to have an objective third party. It's hard to do this with, say, for example, members of your board who have a lot of say in the organization, because they need to be a part of the discussion. They don't need to be the one being objective who can ask hard questions. So that objectivity really helps. This is where, a plan can help you, I think. Okay. That's the model. That took less time than I thought, but which is great because we'll have lots of time for discussions and questions. So I want to start with, what questions do you all have for me regarding all that? And then we'll get through all those. And then I actually have some good strategic discussion questions to ask you that you can sort of ponder and think about as you begin to shape about how to sort of begin the process of a strategic planning for your own library. So, but let's start with your questions for me. Anything, clarification, those kind of things. Questions? We got any?
I have a question, Eddie. I'll just ask it verbally, but a reminder that you also can put your questions in the chat. In fact, that's probably the better way, just to preserve anonymity. But my question, Eddie, is how do you determine who all is at the table when you're talking about the strategic planning process? And is it the same players all the way through the process, or do people come in and go out throughout the process?
That is a fantastic question. And I would say the process overall should involve all of your key stakeholders, but not everyone needs to be involved in the whole process. And so, for example, when you're beginning with reality, you might want to get some perspective from, say, city manager, county commissioners, city council, or others, in terms of you want their input about how they perceive the library, what they see, where do they see the library going, those kinds of things. Those are helpful and can inform then what shapes the plan. You don't necessarily want all of those people involved in the actual creation of a plan because they bring a lot of, for lack of a better term, noise to the discussion. Because when you get down into the nuts and bolts of how are we actually going to do this, whatever sort of plan we come up with, they're not going to have a lot of insight because they don't know really the day in and day out. And so I would say it just depends. It depends on the library. It depends on the size and the scope, how much help you need, how much help they're willing to give. For example, if you're going to do a planning session that, might take 3 or 4 sessions or a couple of days of effort, that's a big ask for volunteers who are like on your board or friends of the library. But there might be some who are willing to sort of be the voice of the friends and chime in at certain times to give their perspective or lend their perspective. And then all of that has to be circled back. Of course, if you're dealing with ideas or services that require funding and so forth, that has to be circled back with, administration and city managers, et cetera, to make sure that we're building that in to a budget request or something similar. Does that make sense? Does that kind of answer, Gretchen?
Yes, and we actually had a question in the chat that came in, and the question was, how do you get city managers or council or other leadership who might not entirely understand the library culture on board? So I'm going to ask the questioner, did Eddie cover that, or do you want some clarification? It's a slightly different question, how you get them on board with library planning. So let me know if that's answering the question. And Eddie, if you have any other insight for that piece of it, how do you get the city leadership on board?
Yeah, well, she just responded, so I think that covered it. But let me just sort of add or augment to that answer, which is, I don't think you'll ever have a problem getting them on board with the idea of doing some planning, because almost every city government, county government does some sort of planning, budget planning, leadership retreat. They do something similar because they're having this same process kind of discussion amongst themselves about what do we want to accomplish next year, for example, and what budget does that require. They're having those strategic discussions. So I don't think that you'd have trouble getting them on board with the idea of having strategic discussions. You might have trouble getting them on board with participating in the library strategic discussions. And if that's the case, I would say, well, maybe you don't need them to participate in the whole thing. Maybe we can just have a discussion with the county commissioners or the city manager or something like that and just get their feedback. And get a little bit careful with county commissioners or city council because you can't really have them all together without it being an official meeting. That's a walking meeting. That's a violation of the meeting rules. So, but you might be able to survey them individually or talk with them individually and kind of get their perspective about what they see, what they like about the library. It's also a great time to sort of do some PR. If they don't really know the library, not that familiar, like, well, come to the library, I'll give you a library card, etc. Right? It's an opportunity to sort of connect them. Yeah, I don't know if that answers it, but that's my think.
I think so. I don't see another question, but I have another one too. So one of the things libraries traditionally think of when they're doing strategic planning is surveying the public. And so when and how do you effectively use that? And then Justin, I see you've got a question, so we can park my question if you would like to go. Justin, no, okay. Well, answer my question, and then Justin's going to weigh in with it.
Okay, yeah, because we got plenty of time. So, hi, Justin. When to survey the public? Well, I love surveying the public, but I think you want to think through strategically, what do you want to ask, right? That's really about, I would only survey the public if you're trying to get a deep understanding of what they actually need, or you're trying to get feedback on something that you're already doing and you're trying to get a sense of, does this work? Do you like it? Whatever. In my professional experience, surveying public only ever confirms what you already know. Does that make sense? Like, so if you ask them, hey, do you like the summer reading program? You're either going to hear, yes, I absolutely love it, or what is summer reading? Right? Like, so, which you could have already, figured out. Like, there are people who participate, and when they do, they love it. And there are people who don't, and when they don't, what does it matter? Right? What does it matter whether they like it or not? And so you got to think carefully about what questions are we asking and what questions do we really need answers to. Now, where it can be really helpful is really when you're getting that sense of hey, who do we serve and what do they need? Not what do they need from us, but what do they need in the community? What are their community needs? That's helpful, I think, in a public survey. Public surveys are a big lift unless you're just asking them, current library users or whatever. You're giving them a flyer at the desk or something, right, to fill out, or a QR code to check some boxes on a form or something online. If you're really trying to get a sense of community needs, you need to get at the people who aren't using the library. And how do you do that, right? That's the biggest conundrum, I think, in our professional experience, which is the biggest conundrum in any professional experience, in any retail sales experience. How does Target figure out what people who don't shop at Target need? Right? There's a big question mark there. How do we find the people who aren't using the library? And then how do we figure out why they're not? Those are big questions. And I think those are good strategic questions to sort of put in the context of a survey that maybe could go to the whole community. Or I've seen some cities who do it, through their water bill or something that's already being mailed out, and that's helpful to kind of get a sense of community needs. You don't want to over survey. You don't want to make it a 900 question, 7-hour survey thing to complete. You want to keep it really focused and really short as possible, and try to get to an answer that you already suspect, or you're trying to look for confirmation to an answer you already suspect. Really, it's about that is like classic scientific method, right? Surveying the public is about, I have a thesis, I'm going to test my thesis. That's how I've always sort of handled it professionally and in consultation with organizations who have done that, rather than, hey, let's send out a broad open-ended survey and see what we get back. For that, you might be able to pull in a focus group of, friends of the library or people who regularly use the library, what we would call power users, right? People who are in the library every week, be like, hey, we're doing a lunch thing next Friday and we're going to have pizza. And would you come talk to us about why you use the library, right? Like, that's helpful because they're already users. But acknowledging that the data is going to be skewed because they're library users. So they're going to talk about why they love the library. And you just fed them pizza. So what are they going to say? They're not ever going to say anything negative, right?
Yeah. So would you consider this as part of the validate the plan step,
yeah.
Eddy? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, unless you have a looming question in the B phase where you're just trying to get reality and you have just some outstanding question, I don't know what our community needs. Okay, well, then part of the plan needs to be, we got to figure that out, right? Like, that needs to be an action item in the plan. That might be one of our top 3 priorities initially. And so we're going to need to execute that. But then, yeah, we're going to need to validate what we think they need. Does that make sense?
Yep.
That's a great question. All right, Justin, you've been more than patient with your hand raised this entire time.
Yeah, my arm was getting tired. I'm glad it was. Yeah. So thank you, Eddy and Gretchen, for doing this. Sorry I was late. I kind of got distracted and forgot, but I'm better late than never. I'll go back and watch the recording. So you might have already answered this a little bit, but Eddy, we worked together a few years ago. I think it was about 5 years ago now when we did our long-range plan with you. So part of that long-range plan was building a new building. And we're getting closer, a little bit closer. But, we have had a change in leadership in that time. And it has been 5 years since we last did our long-range plan. So I've been mulling over long-range planning. And I was thinking, would it be better to A, start now, or B, wait till after the building is being built? So, like, when do you start? Do you wait until you hopefully have accomplished like the big goal of your initial 5-year plan, or do you just go ahead and start tomorrow?
That is a great question. So I would say, no, don't wait. Here's why. The goal of strategic planning is not to create a plan. The goal of strategic planning is to operate from a strategic vantage point. And to do that, you need to ask those questions over and over again of what are our priorities. You might still retain the number 1 priority, which was we're going to build a new building or a wing on the building or whatever that was. But there might be 2 other priorities that weren't priority 5 years ago, but need to be priority now. And that process of re-sifting and reprioritizing can't wait every 5 years. Well, here's the case in point, right? 5 years ago was 2020. Anything we planned in 2020 was completely blown away.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and then I think our strategic planning process actually got interrupted by COVID.
Yeah.
So
we actually got hijacked by COVID in the planning front. Yeah, and so, I mean, rather than think of it as, hey, this is an event I need to do every 5 years, think of it as a philosophic approach of I am continually operating from a strategic priority viewpoint. And maybe I need to reshuffle those priorities, or I don't. The ones I have are still priority, but you're thinking through the process and recognizing, well, my current priorities are still the priority, so I don't need to go through the whole thing again. But you do need to ask those initial questions about where are we in reality? Are we making progress? Are we, moving forward? And then the other part of that is just sort of that iterative, always thinking sort of forward, right? A great sort of simple way to sort of break this down in your head is in terms of planning is just think of it in a 3-year spread rather than a 5-year spread. We always sort of, professionally, historically, we always sort of talked about a 5-year plan, but the reality is 5 years is too long. COVID taught me anything. It taught me 5 years is too long, because anybody who had a 5-year plan 6 years ago, all of that is bust, right? Like, it's just not ever coming back. And so can we think of it in terms of continually operating in sort of 3 parallel planes? One is we're operating this year. And so what are we doing strategically this year that helps us fulfill the mission? And can we prioritize those things, 1, 2, 3. Second is we're budget planning for next year. And so thinking about what our priorities are for next year, especially as it impacts budget, because you're going to put in budget requests and so forth, and then doing that in a timing that stays ahead of, whatever the city's or the county's budget requests. So for those that don't know, Justin's in Hillsborough, right? And so the City Library of Hillsborough. So, right, so whatever the city manager needs in terms of budget, timing, etc., what can we be thinking about for next year in terms of strategy? And then the third thing, the third sort of parallel plane is what comes beyond that. And this is where your building might fall in, right? Because we might be more than 3 years out, maybe not now, but back then we were more than 3 years out. But recognizing that, hey, that's a longer term priority, but I have to articulate it in year 3 and beyond as a priority so that we can be functionally accomplishing and moving things in that direction, fundraising, getting plans, architects, all those kinds of pieces. Now, those pieces have to be in place now. And so you kind of reverse engineer, what are the longer term things? What are next year things? What are this year things? And then prioritize accordingly. And if you do that and you keep those 3 things going simultaneously all the time, you will be in a hugely productive strategic position. What are we doing right now that moves the mission? What are we doing for next year that we need to budgetary plan for? And what are we doing beyond that that impacts now that we need to be working towards? And if you do the top 3 things in each of those 3 things, which ultimately is 9 things, you'll have the most strategic organization on the planet. You'll run rings around everybody. So there's a challenge for you, man. I just throw that little gauntlet down there. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, it does. Start now.
Yeah. And then just continually. And then the reason why I always recommend the top 3 things and only 3 is because the next iteration, let's say you do it once every 6 months or once every year, you might decide next year that, hey, priority, what we said last year was priority number 2, really something else shifted in our community and we've got to bring this other thing forward, right? Or something shifted in our environment. IMLS funding went away and we need to do something else. That's not a hypothetical, right? And so we have to rejig the priorities. Having that rhythm more regularly helps you be a lot more adaptive without feeling like you wasted a bunch of energy on something that now you can't fulfill, right? That's very deflating. It's deflating emotionally. It's deflating to the organization, to staff. It's like, well, we worked hard on that for the last 3 years and now we just threw it away. Well, stuff moved. And we need to be able to be agile enough to move quicker. So let's work on that, right? Culturally. And so, yeah, those shorter iterative cycles, again, everybody's organization has a different rhythm, a for-profit company might have a totally different rhythm than a library, but whatever rhythm makes sense, whether that's once a year, once every 6 months. Lots of organizations I work with, nonprofits, do it once a quarter, just to kind of make sure that, hey, we're spending time and energy moving in the right direction and that nothing shifted in the last 3 months that could radically change our priority list. And so I don't know if that helps, but whatever rhythm makes sense to you. If it needs to be every 5 years, it can be every 5 years. I don't want to bash the 5-year plan. But 5 years now seems like a long time. After COVID, I think all of us were like, wow, maybe 5 months isn't long enough at some points during the COVID 2020 year. Yeah. Great question, though. Gretchen, thanks for linking the Michael Porter article. Yeah, that's a really good article. It is very corporate when you read it, because he's writing, obviously he's publishing it in the Harvard Business Review, so it has a very business perspective, but an incredibly seminal article about just getting to the heart of what is the purpose of strategy. And it really comes down to competitive advantage. What can we do differently that our competitors would have a hard time doing? And in our world, we may not often think of in terms of competition or competitors, but I think Amazon is a competitor. Bookstores are competitors, although we may partner with them, right?
Yeah, I think that is something, Eddie, that I've seen in my years in library world, and coming from a business background originally, that we are businesses. We are nonprofits, which just means that we reinvest the money we make back into our entity without having to pay off shareholders or pay taxes. But we are businesses that have to run effectively and efficiently. And we provide services that can be hard to get metrics off of to report to our stakeholders, but it doesn't in any way lessen our impact and our need to be a viable organization. If the library goes under, and many are city or county operations, but quite a few are still nonprofits. And so if the library goes under, what is lost is critical.
Yeah.
So operating as a strategy, operating with strategic priorities is definitely
what's
what we have to do.
What's at stake, right? We all essentially run an operation, and that's particularly true, Gretchen, of you and I's organizations, because we actually are businesses. We just happen to be nonprofit businesses, and some of the libraries are operating as nonprofits too. But when it comes to a city department or a county department, Justin, as you just commented there in the chat, we might be competing with other city departments for resources. Rather than think of it as a competition, think of it as we have a distinct competitive advantage because no one else in the city or the county can do what we do. And so think of it as we have a unique advantage, and that unique position allows us to sort of think strategically and operate strategically. And yes, ultimately, there's only so many tax dollars to go around, but we do provide a public good. So this is one of the dangers, I think, in thinking of our operations as a business or any government operation as a business, which we've heard a lot of lately at the federal level. But the truth is, they are not a business. They are a public good. And so it's like saying that the fire department needs to operate as a business. That's insane. There is no profit in putting out fires. It is a service for the public good. And so saying that government departments need to operate like a business is a bit of a fallacy in that they can't work that way. Instead, you need to think of it as we provide a public good that has a unique position and is difficult for competition to repeat or to compete with. And so that's about thinking differently instead of, hey, I need to make a value as a for-profit business versus I need to provide value in the unique lane in which my organization exists. And that's a very nuanced difference, but it's a hugely important one when it comes to those of you who are government entities, whether county or city or, are you providing value that no one else in the community can provide? That's the real question. And that's the measure of your effectiveness, I think. And I'm happy to go stand in front of your city council or your county commissioners and tell them so on your behalf if you need me to. So
You heard it.
Yeah, listen, we are a service. And I will steal a phrase that my dear friend Gretchen Pruitt has used for years. We are second responders. We're not the first responders, right? In the case of emergency, fire, police, etc. But we are the next layer of government engagement with the community. In fact, for most of our libraries, we are the most common engagement of government with the constituency, except maybe the water bill office or the parks department, maybe. But we are the front, the non-emergency front of government engagement. And so that's helpful to sort of have in your mindset when you talk to county administrators or talk to city administrators about the value of the library and the value that you bring. That's why it's important strategically that you understand what the community needs are, so that you can bring value to those needs. The reason why public libraries exist, talk about shifting patterns and trends in the world around us. Public libraries were started because books were expensive and they were rare. And so our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson among them, which was the first public library in the United States, was his private library that he donated and made it publicly available. The rationale was an informed public supports democracy. And the best way to do that in a world where books are expensive and rare is to share them. Well, books are no longer expensive or rare. They are cheap and plentiful, as is other forms of information. And so we need to understand what our competitive advantage is, air quotes around that, not on my camera, but there we go, on my camera, right? Air quotes around what our competitive advantage is in our current marketplace so that we can position ourselves as being valuable and bringing value to our community. And I think that has a slightly different answer in each community that you serve. So you have to think through that for yourself. But long gone, and I think anyone who's been in libraries now in the last couple of years, long gone and long evaporated is the deep pool of public trust that we drew from, right? That well has dried or is in the process of drying. It's a muddy hole at the bottom now. So when you lift that bucket up, you get a lot of muck. And that's because books are no longer rare and they're no longer expensive. They're now cheap and plentiful, as is other forms of information. So we have to find a different way of expressing our value and our competitive advantage. And that's less about proving your value and more about communicating the value that you already understand, right? And I think if there's anything that we collectively as a profession haven't done really well is we haven't really nuanced out that value in ways. We are good at telling our communities what we do and why that matters to them. That's not the same as understanding what they need and bringing value to what they need. I don't know if that makes sense, but that was totally off the top of my head. So I probably will think through that later and be like, oh, that was a crappy answer. I should have tweak that more. So anyway,
we can always put it in the email when we send out the thing. So, a chance for a do-over.
Yes, and I probably should, disclaim these, ideas expressed here are my own and are in no way a reflection of plan or, anything else.
TFLAC, IMLS. Again, thank you to those two organizations for this funding. So is everybody out there who's been listening, are you ready to go? Do you have any questions about where to start, how to get this off the ground? Because sometimes I know, I'll just say for myself, I understand the big picture, but it's hard to just take that first step. And so is anybody feeling that, or are y'all good? You're ready, you've got it done, you know exactly who, what, where, when, and how to launch this. So we'll take questions on those topics. Yvonne, yes. Eddy, can you see the question?
I do. I can. Yes. How do you start when you're in a new organization, particularly an academic library? Well, it starts with getting real, Yvonne. It starts with really asking some of those hard questions like, hey, what's working, what isn't working? A good place to begin organizationally is like, where are we experiencing pain? Like either where are we delivering service that's just painful to deliver, or where are we struggling with something? That addressing organizational pain goes a long way towards accomplishing a strategic plan. And so I would start there as a academic library, or even as a department. You know, we're the CERC department, or we're the tech services department. Hey, where are we the most effective? Where are we accomplishing what we think is our best? And where are we struggling? And then begin from that. Start with getting reality. If in the context of answering those questions, you realize, hey, this is a big conundrum. We really need a strategy to sort of solve this or get out of this painful place. That's where you can then begin the conversation more broadly in the organization to say, hey, I think we need to have a strategic conversation around, and I would do it, you know, you don't, even if you're not the leader or whatever, you don't have to be like, I think we need a strategic plan. You can just ask strategic questions like, hey, I think what's our strategy for solving problem X? And strategy is all about how. And so if we understand the situation, we understand what we need and want to accomplish, then we can talk about how. And if in the process of talking about how, no one has clarity about what it is you're needing to accomplish, then back up one question and say, okay, well, what do we really want to accomplish here? Now you're asking a vision question. And how does that tie in with our mission? What is our mission? Why are we here? Right now you're asking big picture questions, but all have a strategic driver. So you don't necessarily have to, again, strategic planning isn't about creating an event or a document. It's about making space to operate from a strategic vantage point day in and day out. That, I don't know, Yvonne, if that gives you what you need, but. Yep. Okay.
Okay. And
I'm looking at the question there. I feel like I need a recommended plan or template. Yeah, community survey, etc. Number of meetings, focus groups. Yeah. Well, that sounds like a great opportunity for plan to help out with. Yeah. Yeah, so again, each of those would get tweaked, you know, depending, but just some, I would break it into chunks, which is why I kind of gave you the 5 stages. You don't have to try to accomplish all 5 at once. In fact, I would say, you know, you can accomplish the begin with reality, reclaiming your purpose, and some of alignment in a single meeting or a series of meetings that are close together. And then you need some space, some brain space, a week or so to sort of think about, okay, how do we actually turn this into actionable things that we can then test? And that takes time over, you know, a rhythm, months, maybe weeks, whatever rhythm makes sense to you. But yeah, that sounds like a good opportunity for plan to step in with a plug and play planning tool.
I love it. And follow-up questions, how long should it take? That's a great question too.
Yeah, well, based on the process I just laid out, it should take forever, or until you accomplish all of your strategic priorities, at which point you can hang an out of order sign on the door and go home. It shouldn't be a process that has an end. It should be a process. It should be a way of operating day in, day out, week after week, so that you are always in a position to strategically respond and move forward and adjust. But I will say that generally, most organizations take a couple of days on the front end to kind of sequester. You don't have to like have a retreat or go off to, some lake cabin. But if you're going off to some lake cabin with your board, I'm happy to lead those sessions, because who doesn't want to do that? But I mean, just having some mental sequestering, right? Like, close the library. We're going to have a day where we're going to talk through some of these questions, so that you're not getting interrupted, so that you're not, trying to think strategically and operationally at the exact same time. That's helpful. But some of that, we, like in Justin's case, we split it up. We did a meeting, 1 or 2 meetings maybe with the friends. I think we did a meeting with some of the board members and some of the city people. And then we did the heavy lift, really, of the library staff. It was sort of broken up over a series of days and weeks. But it just, all that, it depends on your size and how many people you want to, how many stakeholders you really want to involve, and so forth.
Eddy, let me ask you.
You can make a good headway in a couple of days' time.
Can you talk about the difference between a strategic plan and a long-range plan? Is there a difference, or we use both terms? Do you see them as interchangeable?
No, yes. How's that?
Yes, not maybe.
I mean, essentially, yes. If you want to think of it as a long-range plan, and you want to really, I would kind of cognitively split it a little bit. Right? Think about the example I gave to Justin, where I was talking about, if you can operate sort of in 3 parallel modes, right? This year, next year, and beyond. So this year and next year might be what you might call the strategic plan, right? What are our priorities right now that we're working on? The long-range plan is what's beyond. You need to know what those things are, just like in Justin's case, where if we're going to build a new building, we can't wait 3 years to start talking about how to build a new building, right? There are things we need to be doing right now, like hiring an architect and thinking about what we want and finding out what the needs of the community are, how much space we want, all those kinds of planning pieces that go into. If you wait 3 years to start those things, you're never going to start those things, right? Because 3 years from now, there will be more pressing immediate needs that will gobble up your time, and it will be the tyranny of the urgent. And so we have to define what those longer term things are and kind of reverse engineer our plan, so that we begin to, with intentionality, make some steps towards those things that are important but not urgent. And anything that's more than 3 years out is definitely not urgent. Right? Especially if you have a small staff, or maybe you're the only person, right? Most urgent thing is, can we just open the doors and turn the lights and get the bills paid and all that, right? And then we survive and lock the door on our way out at the end of the day, right? That's how most of our days go. But if you spend every day doing just that, you will never get a new building. And so you have to sort of make space for those. So are they interchangeable? Yes, I would instead say they are 2 pieces of the same concept. What are the long-term things that we want to accomplish, and how can we begin with intentionality moving that direction now, as we fit into, we're operating this year, we're planning for next year, we're thinking about what comes after.
Right.
Does that
It
That's
is.
a great question.
It's also because, the state library on the accreditation application asks if you have a long-range plan. And so I wanted everybody to feel comfortable answering that question honestly. But again, the long-range plan to me is just one piece of this process. And so I loved your explanation, and it's nice to think about beyond, but this year and next year right now are, I think, critical for us. We're still trying to navigate this new environment. A lot of changes like you said, since COVID. Gosh, the landscape looks nothing like 2019.
Yeah, and also keep in mind that the longer out you go, the more fuzzy those things can be, right? And that's perfectly acceptable. A long range plan might be, yeah, we're gonna eventually have our new our own building or whatever. We're gonna build a new library or 17 branches or whatever. they can be very fuzzy. Having a long-range plan doesn't necessarily mean that I have mapped out every single step necessary to get me to year 10. Year 10 can be fuzzy. It can be just a defined sense of vision. And that really is a vision exercise of really painting a picture of what do we want to look like in 10 years. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have the 250 steps necessary to get you there defined. You can have the vision defined and that be your long-range plan. As long as you're using that to inform how we operate this year, how we plan for next year. Does that make sense? Think of it as, just like looking, you're driving down the highway. Things that are closer to you are obviously much clearer, and you can see and respond to much better. Things that are a long way off are a lot harder to see, and things that are over the horizon are really just about, we're headed that direction, right? If I'm to drive from Abilene to Austin to see Gretchen, then I know I can only see about 20 miles down the road, but I'm headed in a direction. And that doesn't mean that my destination of Austin is any less strategic than what I can see. And so, having that process that allows me to continually adapt my current driving conditions based on what I can see doesn't change my intended destination, right? So I still have a plan, right? Where we get crazy with strategic plan, if I could just run with this metaphor for a minute, is we might say, hey, I am wanting to go to Austin, and I get in the car and I head west from Abilene, right? and not realize for days and weeks and months and sometimes years that, until I cross over into New Mexico, that, hey, I'm not actually moving towards where I wanted to go. That's a perfect metaphor for why you need both the long-term plan, which is an intended destination, and a shorter-term execution plan that says, I need to drive south and not west. Does that make sense?
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah. Good question. Great question.
So, are there other questions out there? Not seeing any right now.
Everybody's gone quiet. Your stunned silence is very reassuring. As a quote from Monsters Inc., for those of you who are familiar with Monsters Inc. Yeah, overall, I would just say this doesn't have to be a stressful process. This can be fun. It can be really, I have found it to be, and maybe Justin chime in if it was different for you all, but it can be very energizing for the organization, not just for you all as employees, but for the broader, the board, the city council. It can be very energizing when done rightly, because it's not drudgery and you're not just ticking a box that says I have to have a plan, but instead you're actually envisioning where do we want to go, and then figuring out how do we get there? How do we get there with our current reality? None of us are going to have $10 million dropped out of the sky on our lap, although that does sometimes happen. Most of us have to work with a lot of sweat to make what we want happen and to get to the destination we want to go to. But it can be very energizing to really work towards that goal, and particularly for the staff. And I think that's hugely important in our profession, because a lot of what we do, let's be honest, is just transactional, right? It's circs in and circs out, and you can get lost in those transactions, and it can feel like all we ever do is say hi to people, tell them where the water fountain is, and check out their books. But the reality is you actually have a driving why. That's why I encourage you to figure out what your why, even if your own personal why. Why am I in this profession? Where do I get my joy? Where do I find those things that are fulfilling? What are those things? Can I articulate them? And let those things be the driver for where you want to go. That is incredibly motivating to you. It's incredibly motivating to the people around you, and especially if you have staff and for them to understand the context of their work day in and day out and why that helps drive the organization forward. That's all powerful stuff.
Absolutely. Okay.
So for those of you who lead organizations, I'm going to make a shameless plug for next week. On Wednesday, Gretchen and I were so clever. We thought, well, let's do 3 consecutive Thursdays at the same time. It'll be easy for people to remember. And then, duh, one of them was a holiday. So we can't do that. But next Wednesday, we're going to reconvene and talk about the difference between management and leadership. And they're not the same. But for most of us who lead organizations, you have to do both. And so we'll talk through that in some detail next time. There, I've made my own shameless plug, Gretchen.
Thank you. And then there's a third session, the third Thursday session.
The following week
almost-
after that is
imposter syndrome.
Yes, a topic that I am an expert in. Imposter syndrome. So we're going to talk about what does it really mean to lead with vulnerability and truth, and how do you do that when you feel like you're faking it every day. And so we'll talk through that in great detail. Yeah.
And we also have
that'll be a fun discussion.
It's going to be great. We also have 2 sessions by Kimberly Silk, another library leader who is going to get into the nuts and bolts of managing employees. So we have 2 sessions with Kimberly next Tuesday at 2. It will talk about how to keep your employees engaged. It's called Employee Engagement Techniques. And then the following Tuesday from 2 to 4, we'll have her speaking about transitioning into supervisory roles, especially when you're going from being their peers to being the supervisor. And we know that in small libraries, especially, that happens a lot. Because Justin's pointing.
Happen to Justin. Yeah.
Yes. So Justin, I hope you'll be able to be on that session, attend that session with us and give us some of your own observations and experiences. But we're hoping that these topics are all topics that are going to be relevant to you. We've scheduled them for 2 hours, but they'll take the time they take. And if it doesn't take the full 2 hours, great. But we want to make sure we have time for your participation. So please sign up again for each session individually so we can make sure we get all the information out. We'll be following up with a recording of today's session as well as Eddy's slides. And we will be giving a post-training survey. Jeffrey is going to put a link in the chat here for the survey, I believe. But we'll also send that link out with the recording. So please give us your feedback. And please send messages that the IMLS continues. We would love to keep offering trainings like this. This was made possible by IMLS. We love our library leadership and we're so collaborative, but at some point we need to compensate people who've developed these trainings and devote a great deal of their personal time to this effort. So please make sure that you tell everyone the value of IMLS and TSLAC in your libraries, as well as the value that you provide. So with that, I just want to thank you again, Eddy. This was fascinating. I hope you all enjoyed it. And again, you don't have to, you can register just to get the training sessions. So I hope you all have a great rest of the day. And thank you for being here.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
All right.
Great job, Gretchen.